Hello, everyone. My name's Mia. I guess if you look at my brand named clothes and expensive car, you'll think I'm a typical spoiled daughter of some rich parents, a so-called golden child. But it's not like that at all. I can't say I earned everything I have now by myself. Let's just say I came to the right place at the right time, and I did the thing I thought was right to do. Maybe some of you will judge me, but first, I'll tell you my story. Make sure you watch this video to the end, and then you'll find out how I managed to change my life dramatically. Here we go. My family was always poor. We barely made both ends meet. My dad was the only one who worked and earned money. My mom was always doing house chores. She also raised me, my younger brother, and sister. My dad was a builder, and because of his job, he always had to move from one place to another. That's why we had to live an almost nomadic lifestyle. We never stayed any place for long. We didn't even have a house of our own. Most of the time, we had to live in some rented apartments, where 5 of us lived in the same room. Well, my life was far from being an ordinary teenage one. Because of our frequent moves, I had no friends. I could never invite anyone to my place to have a pajama party. I was always dressed humbly. I looked like a gray mouse, and I was often an outcast at school. Of course, I dreamed of a different life. I often imagined what it would be like if my parents were one of the richest people in the world. I would definitely have my own room, lots and lots of toys, beautiful dresses. I would go to school in an expensive car with a personal driver. Alas, those were only my dreams. But the reality was quite different. I looked at my classmates and envied them. They had the latest gadgets. They told each other stories how they spent their summer vacations at the coolest resorts, or celebrated their birthday parties in cool entertainment centers. When I heard these stories, I wanted to cry. I was also very angry with my parents, thinking they just didn't want to do anything to change their lives and earn more money. Anyway, my childhood was unlucky. That's probably why I quickly matured and started working part-time since I was 13. I delivered mail, I sold ice cream in a van. I played with kids in an amusement park, wearing a mascot outfit, and so on. I was particularly good at the last one, because I spent a lot of time with my younger brother and sister. I hoped I would spend the money I earned on myself only. I wanted to buy some clothes, have some beautiful school supplies. However, more often than not, I had to give out most of my income to my mom to buy some groceries or to pay bills for the apartment. Of course, I was offended, but I understood it was a necessary thing to do. Otherwise, our family simply wouldn't survive. The older I got, the more I realized I had to study well. This was my way to get a scholarship and go to college, and thus I could get a good education and then a well-paid job. So I always did my homework diligently, and even went to some extra classes. I was especially interested in learning foreign languages and cultures. I dreamed I would finish school and be able to study somewhere in Europe, but I had to get a scholarship for this, and I gotta be the best of the best to get it, and that was another reason why I needed to study harder. Already at 15, I was fluent in Spanish and French. Oddly enough, this knowledge helped me to find a very good job. Which one? A waiter in a 5-star hotel restaurant. Can you imagine that? You're probably wondering how I managed to get a job in such a place, despite the fact I was underage. It's simple. I lied about my age. I said I was 19, but because of my small stature and thin build, I look younger. They bought it. I even had to forge the documents. Of course, I knew I was violating the law, but I really needed this job and the money. After all, the salary they promised was enough to share with my mom and leave something for myself. Besides, it was a great opportunity to practice my foreign language skills. By the way, the latter skill was one of the key requirements to get this job, and I did this part of the interview perfectly. The restaurant customers were wealthy and respectable people, businessmen, foreign ambassadors, show business stars. While I was serving them, I was very afraid to do something wrong, make a mistake when setting the table or mess up the details of the order. But I already said that I tried to be the best of the best, so I quickly got used to my new job, and I learned how to communicate with the customers. Of course, my communication influenced my tips, which I was very happy about. After all, it was a good bonus to my decent salary. I could finally spend the money I earned on myself. I bought some new clothes, and this time, not from some freaking secondhand stores where my whole family went. I bought some cosmetics to make me look more mature at my job. I was able to buy some toys and sweets for my younger brother and sister. It was very difficult for me to combine my studies and my work in a restaurant, but I tried to do everything on time because I felt that my life was just beginning to get better. Our regular customers were a married couple, Mr. and Mrs. White. They were both under 40. They wore expensive clothes and luxury accessories. When they came in, everyone could smell the flavor of wealth, prosperity, and security. In the afternoon, Mr. White came to the restaurant for lunch, and he discussed something with his business partners. In the evening, he had dinner with his wife. They talked and drank wine. Every time I served them, I tried my best to please them. First, because I was sure that such big people don't tolerate mistakes. Second, they always left me some quite generous tips. I must say, my efforts weren't in vain. After a while, the Whites asked the receptionist about my name. They also wanted to know about my work shifts and schedule. I was very pleased with such attention. They always smiled at me and they were always polite. And I was happy because I thought knowing such wealthy people is very helpful in life. Looking at the Whites from the outside, I often imagined what their house looked like, how many floors it had, and whether they had a butler and maids. I thought they even had a beautiful Labrador running around the house, and I secretly envied their kid, or kids. They probably had everything they wanted, and they don't need to run to work after school, do homework at night, and sleep for 3 to 4 hours during the breaks. I was still angry and resentful of my difficult fate, but even then I was sure I would definitely get out of poverty. One day I was mindlessly flipping through TV channels. I had my first day off in a couple of months, and my only desire was just to lie there and empty my head. But suddenly, I saw some familiar faces on the news. My regular customers, Mr. and Mrs. White. I couldn't believe my eyes. I never asked them about their business, though I always wondered where they got so much money if they could afford to eat at an expensive restaurant several times every day. The news said they jointly ran a large IT company that created and implemented different software. They founded the company when they were both young as students. They developed it as a startup. Then one big deal after another followed, and the business began to grow and gain income. At the moment, their company is one of the leading software manufacturers in the country. Seems like their life was wonderful, if it weren't for one big but. They didn't have any kids. What? The journalists constantly bombarded them with questions like who would become the heir of their business empire, and how could they leave it without successors? The Whites didn't comment on this. I didn't know much about it, but I was surprised that they didn't have any kids. So I've been jealous of someone who didn't exist all this time? This is ridiculous. Are the Whites happy without kids? Maybe that's why they prefer to spend almost every evening in a restaurant instead of staying at home? The next time Mr. and Mrs. White came to the restaurant, I couldn't help but wonder why they didn't have any kids. However, I understood that first, it was impolite. Second, we didn't have a close enough relationship to discuss such things. Third, it was none of my business. But my curiosity won. I really wanted to know. That day, the couple were actively discussing something. They even argued. Mr. White tried to convince his wife of something, but she couldn't agree. It was the first time I'd ever seen them in such a situation. They were almost fighting. I was even somewhat embarrassed to approach their table, even though their meal was already starting to get cold. I didn't know what to do and how to behave. As soon as they became silent, I immediately caught the moment and brought them their meal. I quickly set the plates on the table, put down the cutlery, and just turned away when I heard the decisive voice of Mrs. White. I don't need a baby at home. That evening, I went to their table a couple of more times to bring some food and drinks. I heard some snippets of phrases, and I think I understood the reason for their dispute. Apparently, the news I saw influenced them, and now they were really concerned about their heir. I guess Mrs. White doesn't dream of changing diapers and getting up at night to feed a baby, so she was totally against having a baby, if I got her right and drew the right conclusions. At the end of the meal, the Whites thanked me and apologized for the noise. They also left me an even bigger tip than usual. Apparently, that was a reward for my silence. By chance, I witnessed a dispute I wasn't supposed to witness. At night, I couldn't sleep for a long time. I kept thinking about my regular customers and their dispute. On the one hand, it was clear that Mrs. White didn't want to have kids. She was about 40, and she was a successful businesswoman who couldn't afford to spend all her time with kids and give up all her work. I can't even imagine her being a housewife and a mommy. On the other hand, they could provide a comfortable life for any kid on earth. They could hire a babysitter, teachers, guards, whatever. I wish I could be that kid. That was my last thought before I went to sleep. In the morning, I had a very strange thought. Why, anyway, could I not be that very kid? Why? Because this situation had great advantages for everyone. The Whites wouldn't have to mess with a little baby, raise it, feed it, change diapers, care for it, and so on. The only thing I needed was to provide for me and pay for my studies in Europe. That's it. And later, they could confess they hid me from society for a long time because they were afraid for my safety, and that would sound quite believable. And no need to tell how much benefit I would get from this situation. I would be in seventh heaven. I'd have what I've always wanted. A big house, expensive brand-named clothes, a car, traveling, and an elite college. I guess you think I'm totally crazy because how in the world could rich business people adopt me while I still have biological parents alive and a family? Well, then, in this case, my parents will have to give up their parental rights to me. But seriously, why not? My parents have 2 other kids, my younger brother and sister. And if the Whites adopted me, I would be well off. If I were well off, I would help my real family. This is a real win-win. I was so excited by my own fantasies that I couldn't concentrate on my studies. And when I was at work, I almost spilled a bowl of soup on the head of a very important customer. I was looking forward to seeing the Whites at the restaurant. I even thought out the words I would say to them. I would explain to them my plan in detail. Then, I would tell them how convenient it would be to adopt a 15-year-old girl, despite the fact I was sort of independent and mature. But when Mr. and Mrs. White came to dinner, I couldn't utter a word. Suddenly, my whole plan seemed ridiculous to me. I thought after hearing me out, they would only laugh in my face, thinking I was too young and stupid. And this would be the best-case scenario. In the worst case, they'd call the restaurant manager and tell him he had a minor girl at work. So I would not only fail with my plan, but I would also lose my well-paid job and probably never get another one. The risk was too high. Anyway, I couldn't make up my mind to do it. That day, the couple didn't argue. They calmly talked about some affairs. But when I was about to take the empty plates from the table to serve the dessert, I heard a phrase that was a signal for me to act. Mr. White suggested his wife think about adopting an adult kid, a teenager for instance, instead of having a baby, and I couldn't stand it any longer. I turned to the Whites with empty plates and said firmly, "You can adopt me." Do I need to say how surprised they were after hearing such a statement? They were in complete shock. I was shocked too because of my own frankness. While they were recovering, I tried to briefly explain to them my idea. I said I was, in fact, 15, not 19. My parents and I lived in poverty. Besides, there were 2 other kids in my family, so it was quite okay for me if they adopted me. And I said I was smart, I studied well, I fluently spoke 2 foreign languages, and my dream was living a comfortable life and studying in Europe. I saw no point in hiding my real motives from them. For some reason, I thought they'd believe me and agree. They were both silent for a while, and I had already thought what a fool I was, and that now I would definitely lose my job. Suddenly, Mr. White said, chuckling, "Not a bad idea, though." Oddly enough, Mrs. White supported him. The couple admitted they had long been suspecting I was still underage, but they didn't tell anyone about it because they understood how important my work was for me. Mr. White said first they should talk to my family, discuss all the details, including the financial compensation for taking me away. Like I said, it was a real win-win. Of course, my mom and dad didn't agree to give me up at first. My mom cried. She asked me to forgive her for living in such poor conditions. She claimed she would get a job to provide for all of us. I understood it wasn't easy for her to accept my decision, but then I just explained the situation from my side. They had already raised me, and I was very grateful to them for this, but it would be easier for them to move on without me. The Whites also helped me to persuade my mom by promising my parents a good monthly financial compensation for taking me away from the nest. However, it wasn't easy, but in the end, I said that if they wanted a better future for me, they should just let me go. The Whites could give me a good education, and I could find a great job using their connections if I didn't want to stay in Europe after college. On the one hand, it may seem I don't really love my parents, but that's not true. I love them, and understand they did everything they could to raise me and my younger brother and sister, but I personally wouldn't be happy if I stayed with them. And that's 100%. Anyway, my parents signed all the necessary documents to give up their parental rights, and the Whites immediately arranged all the documents needed for the adoption. The whole process was happening in complete secrecy, since everyone around me had to believe later I was their real daughter, whom they simply had hidden for my own safety. And you know what? People easily bought it, and I became the daughter of rich parents, and supposedly the heiress of a large business empire. Of course, this was still up in the air. Formally, the Whites' business would pass to trusted persons in case of their death, but I don't need it for now, because at the moment, my main goal is to enter an elite college that my new mom and dad would provide for me. I gave up my job at the restaurant. I changed my appearance so that none of my friends would recognize me. Fortunately, I'd always been a gray mouse, and I almost had no friends. Besides, I got transferred from my school to a closed private one. Today, I have a huge private room in a big house, a personal driver and a bodyguard, a dressing room with all the clothes and shoes of luxury brands possible. Am I happy with my new life? Totally. Do I miss my real family? Yeah, sometimes, but the Whites didn't forbid me to see them whenever I want. In addition, thanks to their financial support, my real family finally bought their own house, and now their life is getting better. Tell me, what do you think of my story? Do you blame me for what I did? Is it okay to give up your real parents for the sake of a new and rich life? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments below. Thumb up if you enjoyed my story, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notifications to be the first to see the new videos. That's it for today. Bye!